Well, thank you. I want to present today about how the coronavirus has impacted construction firms, their workers, their supply chain, and also their outlook going forward. AGC of America, as you may know, is the leading national construction trade association. We have over 27,000 member companies, general contractors, specialty contracting firms of all types, and suppliers of goods, equipment, and services. They belong through a network of 88 chapters nationwide. And we've been fortunate to be able to tap that network to find out what's been going on a frequent basis. We did 8 surveys from mid-March through mid-June, and then our annual workforce survey that we've been doing every August for the past 8 years. We combined some of the questions from that with the coronavirus surveys we did last June. And we put out the results of that survey, which got over 2,000 responses at the beginning of September. The leading response that I found most useful was what has been happening lately in terms of scheduled projects. And unfortunately, 60% of respondents said that at least one of the projects that they had expected to be working on has now been canceled. That was nearly double the 32% of respondents who gave that answer in our June 9th to 17th survey. So it does appear that canceled projects are becoming much more numerous. On the other side, have you won additional projects or add-ons to projects that you were working on as a result of the pandemic? Only 12% of respondents during August said that was the case, and that was down from 21%, not just in June, but throughout the spring. About 1/5 of respondents were telling us that they had won additional work. That may have been something like a remodeling of a hospital, a new testing or screening facility, or in the case of highway and underground utility contractors, being able to work more hours or close more lanes in order to get work done faster. As you might expect, with the need for social distancing, with delays and disruptions to the supply chain, sometimes workers not being available, government employees not being available, 44% of respondents in our August survey said that projects had taken longer than anticipated. And about 1/3 said that projects cost more than they had anticipated. Now, there have certainly been mixed impacts on firms' headcount. Overall, more firms said that they had had to reduce headcount, 41%. But nevertheless, more than 1/4 of firms, 27%, said that they had increased their headcount as a result of the pandemic. And 1/3 said no change. We did note during the spring that a very high percentage of firms, about 80%, said that they had applied for, won, and used a PPP loan, those Paycheck Protection Program loans that became available at the beginning of April. And that not only enabled some firms to keep workers on the payroll, but allowed some that had already furloughed workers to bring them back. Unfortunately, that money is running out rapidly. Some firms have already used up all of their loan money. And as a result, we do expect more firms to have to furlough workers going forward unless they win new business. In fact, 38% of firms told us that it would take more than 6 months for business to return to a normal volume compared to a year ago. That exceeded the 29% who said that work was already at year-ago levels. And in spite of that, we know that a lot of firms are still having trouble filling hourly craft positions. Over 50% of the firms said that that was a problem. Nevertheless, that is down substantially from our annual surveys for the last several years, where typically around 80% of firms said that they were having trouble filling craft positions. In addition, in past years, most respondents said that craft positions of every type were hard to fill. In this survey, the hardest to fill position was a salaried position, project managers and supervisors. Even though overall, only half as many firms as a year ago said that salaried positions were hard to fill. The ones who did have salaried positions they were trying to fill, typically project managers, supervisors were the ones that they needed to fill. Well, the overall picture on construction employment, broadening the lens from looking just at the AGC survey respondents, this is the picture of construction employment since February. As with the economy as a whole, construction employment peaked in February, it declined a little bit in March, and then it just fell off a cliff in April. Over 1 million construction jobs were lost from March to April alone. And that 2-month decline was almost 1.1 million, or 14% of the overall construction workforce in place in February. The industry has bounced back pretty fast, partly because of those PPP loans, also because many governors and some mayors who had frozen construction activity in April started to allow reopening in May. So by May, construction employment had rebounded about halfway. The gains have continued from May right through August in terms of residential construction employment. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reports each month on 5 kinds of construction companies: residential builders and specialty trade contractors. And I put those together for this series on residential construction. And then non-residential builders, specialty trade contractors, and heavy and civil engineering firms. On the non-residential side, there was a modest gain from May to June, but a slight decrease in construction employment in July and August. And as a result, construction employment is heading in 2 different directions, as I think construction activity will. Now, in terms of costs, we have another series from the Bureau of Labor Statistics that tracks both the input costs, all the materials and services purchased by contractors, and what I call a bid price index. Every month, BLS asks the same group of contractors, what would you charge to put up a certain set of 5 types of non-residential buildings, covering schools, warehouses, offices, industrial, and healthcare buildings? And they weight that according to the share of total projects that those buildings represent to produce this bid price index that's at the bottom of this graph. The bid price index has basically stayed flat from April through August. Meanwhile, the cost of inputs to construction has been rising. For non-residential construction, it's up 4.1% over just 4 months, so that's a very rapid rate of increase. And for new non-residential construction, even more, a 5.1% increase. Now, the non-residential cost increase has been driven very heavily by lumber and wood products, such as plywood and oriented strand board. In fact, there have been sharp decreases in the cost of steel, although there was a kind of a bump briefly in the cost of light gauge steel, such as that used for studs and other interior remodeling projects. And we've also seen a decrease up until now in the cost of aluminum, copper, and recently diesel fuel prices have also come down quite a bit. Let me summarize what's happened so far to construction. As I said, from February to April, we had an enormous job loss, 1.1 million jobs. That was half as many jobs as the industry lost over a 5-year period during the so-called Great Recession. For the economy as a whole, the recession lasted from the end of 2007 to the middle of 2009, but construction actually saw a decline in jobs for 5 years, from April of 2006 until January of 2011. And the construction spending declined for equally long. This time, we've had a much sharper decline at the beginning, but hopefully we'll see a quicker rebound. In fact, from April to August, the industry brought back 61% of the jobs that it had lost. That compares to under 50% for the overall economy. So it seems like a promising start, but we've already seen a divergence between what's happened on residential employment, which has come back 80%, and non-residential, which is back less than 50%. And as I said, I think a major reason for the rebound was the widespread receipt and use of PPP loans. However, that money has just about been exhausted, or has been, by many firms. And meanwhile, we're seeing a growing number of project cancellations and not enough project announcements to enable companies to keep workers on the payroll for much longer. On the residential side, however, the industry seems to be going from strength to strength. While initially there was an equally sharp drop in residential and non-residential construction, every month now we're seeing a bigger increase in home starts, in permits, and also in residential remodeling. On the non-residential side, remodeling is also really taking up a lot of activity, certainly for offices that are trying to space workers further apart, for restaurants that have been adding outdoor seating, and for other public-facing spaces that may have screening or greater separation of people. There's also been, as I said, some additional highway, underground utility, and airport work. In terms of new construction, there certainly has been strong demand for distribution to residences rather than to stores, restaurants, and so forth. And that has caused a big search for spaces to put in distribution facilities that are close to residential customers rather than out in industrial areas or the fringes of metro areas. As so many people are doing work, schooling, entertainment from home, they are using the internet much more, and that has added to demand for fiber optic, for 5G, for cell towers in some places. And both the distribution and the use of the internet at home are requiring even more growth in data center construction than we had had. On the public side, some DOTs did initially award more projects in order to take advantage of the drop in road traffic, in materials costs, and to provide some stimulus to their highway contractors. But at the same time, DOTs are seeing a huge drop in gas tax and vehicle registration fees, so their receipts are falling sharply, and they're going to have to suspend or cancel upcoming projects. Other infrastructure also has been hit by loss of utilization, notably airports. Far fewer people traveling means fewer landing fees from plane operations, and fewer customers buying things in the airports, paying for parking, rental cars, and so forth. And so I think that infrastructure is also headed downward sharply. And then state and local governments have to balance their budgets, usually by June 30th, and that's causing them to cancel or postpone projects that haven't started in preference to laying off workers or ending programs that are benefiting people who may be unemployed, may need rent relief, and so forth. And as a result, I think we're heading to a period where construction will lag the rest of the economy in terms of rebounding. We don't have information on, or I should say, I don't have a prediction yet as to when the economy will come back. It really depends not just on the virus becoming less frequent, but also on a vaccine that people are willing to take and are able to get access to. And then on businesses deciding that, yes, this really is it. we can go ahead not just with reopening, but with expanding. I think a lot of businesses got burned by being able to reopen in May and June and then having to pull back or see the customers not show up in the numbers that they had hoped for. And that's made them even more reluctant to go ahead with a long-term commitment, such as adding a new facility. Developers and investors, lenders, all are looking at what has happened to rents and saying, is it really time to invest in another project if we aren't getting the rent that we had counted on to pay to cover the costs of the projects that we've already done. The universities have certainly been hurt hard by a drop in tuition, in student fees, in athletic revenues in some places, and also wondering how many people should they have on campus, how many are going to come back to campus. So I think it will be a long time before they're investing to the degree they had been in dorms, classrooms, athletic facilities, and so forth. And state and local governments having to shrink that budget gap and generally turning to hold off on construction. The best prospects remain remodeling, distribution centers, data centers, and perhaps we will see some growth in office construction if employers decide, yes, we actually do want to have people back in the office, but not in the high density, high rise downtown locations. Instead, we're going to go back to the suburbs that office employers had been generally moving away from those office parks and into denser so-called work, live, play areas. And we may also see some growth or some return, I should say, to school construction, water and sewer construction, federal construction. These are categories that in general, the need is the same as before. Revenues have been damaged less, or in the case of the federal government, they are able to keep running deficits. But we haven't yet seen any sign of change in where people are going to be settling. The map that I just flashed past shows that construction has, I'm sorry, this shows the change in population state by state from July of 2018 to July of 2019. Normally, the Census Bureau updates this at the end of each year. This year, with the decennial census taking place and still dispute about when they will close that out and present information to Congress, it's not clear when this will be updated. But in any case, the colors on this chart, if not the exact percentages, have been similar over the last several years. That is to say, from July 2018 to July 2019, 10 states lost population, the ones in deep red. All of the states in the Northeast, the midsection of the country, and a few others, most notably California, had very slow population growth, less than the national average of 0.48%. The rapid growth occurred in the Southeast, Texas, Colorado, Washington, and most of all, those states in deep green with growth of more than triple the national rate, Idaho, Nevada, Utah, and Arizona. What was special about those states? Well, first of all, they have higher birth rates. They have a heavy concentration of Mormons who tend to have much larger families than others. But also they have gained from the slowdown in population growth in California. California is still a destination for foreigners, but increasingly people have moved out of California to lower cost states, less hassle commuting, less difficulty starting and running a business. And lately, with the terrible wildfires, as well as the historic mudslides, earthquakes, and and drought, California has become ever more difficult to live in. And of course, other states in the West also having issues with drought and fires. But I think Californians are going to continue to move into these intermountain states. So the question is, has the pandemic changed this dynamic? And I don't think so yet. Yes, we've had reports of of upper income people moving from high density places, notably New York City, into second homes, vacation homes, more rural areas. But I think it's still too early to say, are those moves permanent? Are they going to be followed by larger portions of the population? So for now, I think the colors on this map are fairly representative of what's going to be happening to population growth, and therefore for where demand for construction will be strongest. Certainly the states in pink and even in red, they still have construction activity, but overall, I think the strongest markets are going to be the ones in green. Well, one thing I haven't talked about is what will the federal government do? And I've laid off that because it looks as increasingly the answer for right now is nothing. Hopefully Congress will agree to at least keep the government open, continue spending at the rate that they have in the fiscal year that ends September 30th, and also allow the Federal Highway Trust and Fund to continue collecting revenues and sending money to states for highway programs, to municipal transit systems, for the transit new starts. But in terms of providing additional relief to states, to DOTs, or to boost infrastructure spending, I think we're going to have to wait to see how the election turns out, who's in the White House, and who controls the two houses of Congress. So come back in January for answers to those questions. Meanwhile, if you do have questions, you're welcome anytime to email me at ken.simonson@agc.org, and to subscribe to the Data Digest, my weekly one-page summary of economic news relevant to construction. I'll add anybody watching this program to the email list if you want to email me. And I encourage you to come to our website, agc.org. We have a large section with pandemic-related information at agc.org/coronavirus. Thank you.